So pricing. Now we touched on the pricing thing a little while ago, and we pulled this interesting piece out of Clio. I want to say 7 or 8 episodes ago, where it was really talking about how pricing is seen as the second most important thing to consumers, and yet the ninth most important thing to lawyers when it comes to being successful. And so there's this disparity. And Guy and I touched on this for a little bit, but I thought it made sense for us to come back because pricing is clearly very important to consumers, and yet lawyers really see it as Guy, my perspective is most lawyers, and I do this with my agency, I'm really good and therefore I'm expensive, right? And I think that's a fallacious correlation, right? I don't think that's necessarily always the case. But we often buy things as, I mean, have you ever bought something based primarily on price, Guy?
Yeah. And again, and just for folks that want to hear the previous conversation is the George Saharis episode from Clio on LHLM, and I'm sure we'll put that in the show notes. But, and this is where I want to hear what they taught you in business school about pricing. But, the issue, one of the issues with pricing is, it's just, there's not a lot, like lawyers don't spend a lot of time thinking about it. And they don't think about it. It's like you said, they don't think about it from the perspective of the consumer. They don't think about it from the perspective of the marketplace. They don't think about it from the with the respect to the consumer thing, like what's the value to the consumer. And, most lawyers, my hunch is, and lawyers, if you disagree with this or think that the tide has turned on this, most lawyers you talk to, what's your pricing? It's some hourly rate. Unless you're a contingency fee lawyer, which we can talk about that in a different context. But for most lawyers that are doing, pricing in the more transactional sense, it's usually an hourly rate, and that hourly rate is usually based on their perspective of their knowledge, skill, experience, how long they've been practicing, or as you mentioned, how good of a lawyer they think they are. That's about it.
Yeah, and the business school answer will tell you. I mean, your entry-level strategy or marketing class will teach you the 4 Ps: product, price, place, and promotion. We've talked, and then there's someone snarkily added positioning at the end of that, which we've talked a lot about positioning. We've talked a lot about place, right? So all the local services where your office is, that is the kind of crux of place. We've talked very little bit about pricing. And my bias on pricing here is that most lawyers think on an hourly rate basis, and they equate competency and value to high hourly rates. And that's not always the case. And it's certainly not what consumers want to think about. So, I mean, the very simplistic, and I would say overly simplistic perspective here is that if I'm a really good lawyer, I can charge a really, really high hourly rate. And the reality is there are some things for which consumers realize they don't necessarily need the world's best traffic ticket lawyer, right? And they're sensitive to that. I think.
See, I think about positioning. I mean, this is where it goes from me, because my response to that would be like, yeah. And guess what? Maybe I'm not the lawyer for them. And then you could talk about the access to justice stuff. But I kind of think about it like this. Number one is like goes back to who is your target audience? If are you building a business to service people who are searching for affordable divorce lawyer near me, cheap divorce lawyer near me, or free divorce lawyer near me, or free divorce? Is that who you want to service? Because you're going to build your whole business, including your pricing, to cater to that position. Otherwise, if you're like, hey, it's not, and this is the thing that comes back in the context of the perception stuff. It doesn't matter. Here's the sad thing that lawyers hate to hear. It really doesn't matter how competent you are. It's the consumer's perception of how competent you are. And not just competency. It's just the consumer's perception of your service, of whether people feel like you're empathetic and care about them, because there's value in that, right? Sometimes people are making decisions about which lawyer they're going to hire based on that initial conversation of like, you know what? You sound like you actually care about me.
Right. But the key that you brought up there, I think, Guy, is the correlation, the fallacious correlation between price and quality. Right? In the consumer's mind. we buy, whether you admit it to yourself or not, we frequently buy what we believe to be high quality items based on price, right? If you buy wine, you have done that. And sorry to all the onophiles who I'm insulting right now, but like if you buy wine, you have absolutely done that. If you've ever bought a German car, you have absolutely done that, right? If you've ever bought a Rolex, you've absolutely done that. And so there's this correlation between price and quality. I think what I would try to challenge our listeners here is that's not necessarily the case. You may be really, really good at handling things quickly, right? You may be really, really efficient at running things that need to be run efficiently, and you don't necessarily. I think what I'm trying to break here, and this came up. We're going to bring her up again, but with a conversation with Erin Levine, where she talked about how her lawyers are making more money, right? Even though a lot of what their positioning is for Hello Divorce is not on high price. In fact, it is specifically pushing back on that concept of high price. I think she actually mentioned that in the conversation that we had last time in the business plan, right? Like
Right.
I found that that people cared about price, and yet we weren't really catering to that segment. And I think I want to shift your mindset that you can actually make more money by not competing on being the most expensive lawyer in town.
Well, and here's my thing on that is that I think there's another, we tend to have this other fallacy that consumer perceptions are static, right? So I think one of the things that something like Hello Divorce does a really good job is appealing to the market segment that wants an affordable divorce, educating them, and then helping them draw the conclusion that, hey, you know what? I actually do need to spend some money on this. And so point being that a consumer's perceptions are dynamic. They change, right? So it's like, you know, a very unsophisticated consumer, in certain, and that's not always true, right? Some people are very sophisticated and they're just like, at the end of the day, I just want, and the right fit for them is the affordable, straightforward DIY divorce. That might be right. But what a lot of times, and we see this with search intent, someone that searches for affordable divorce lawyer near me today might end up choosing a high-priced lawyer after they've gone through that education process. And that's the other thing I would tell folks is the more that you can educate those prospects and help them understand why there's value in spending more money on your lawyer, that's how you navigate that.
Yeah, I mean, so what you just talked about, and I hate using this term because it sounds duplicitous and sneaky, and it's not. This is a Trojan horse approach, right? Like there are a lot of people trying to figure out what their financial commitment is given their legal issue. And I want to move away from divorce a little bit because it's so obvious. This applies across the board. There are people trying to figure this out, what this is going to cost me. And I'm really concerned about this. We're not doing a good job. And you mentioned search intent. I want to get to this. We're not doing a great job as legal marketers in not addressing that question frequently.
And that's the thing for me. I mean, because we talked about this in the pre-show, and this is the part that I think is so valuable. You know, we're a marketing podcast here, and you know, we talk about this all the time. Target cost per acquisition. Well, guess what? Target cost per acquisition is tied to lifetime value of a customer, or at least, you know, target fee for a new client. And so those are very, very connected. You know, short for TLDR, higher fee, higher target cost per acquisition.
Let me come back to something you said earlier. You're talking about contingency fees, right?
Yeah.
So personal injury lawyers, how do they compete on price and transparency around price?
You know, they don't really. I mean, some do. I shouldn't say that some do, but most, and again, if you're a PI lawyer and this is not your experience in your jurisdiction or your local community, I would love to hear from you.
Let's talk.
But most of the time, it's a pretty standard percentage, right? I'm taking 30%, 40% of the winnings. Now, and this is maybe what you're alluding to.
Yes,
is that it's free. Right. It's free if we don't win. So what's the price? The price is free except if we win, we get paid on the back end. So, you know, it's almost like, you know, lawyers will hate to hear this, but it's a rev share, right?
it's fee sharing with your client. I don't even want to say that. No, but like,
don't say that. I didn't say
I
that.
think your point here is really, really valid, and this is exactly why I asked the question. There is a very limited understanding among Joe population of that pricing model, right? And I do think there is value in no fee until we win, right? Because pricing becomes a big concern. And I also agree with you, Gyi. Down the road, most consumers are not selecting their attorney based on, hey, these guys are going to take 30%, or those guys are going to take 20%, right? I just don't think that's really happening.
No, I don't think it is either. And lawyers aren't really, I don't think most of them are trying to contingency fee. Lawyers aren't competing on price like this. But here's my thing about this, because I think contingency pricing has an applicability to even in thinking about this in other contexts, which is you're aligning your incentives with your client, right? And so like I always think about it. I mean, think about it in agency pricing models, but hourly pricing, it's the what I call the cab to nowhere, right? We're not connecting it to some kind of value metric. We're just connecting it to number of hours spent. And as a former plaintiff's lawyer, we would see this on the defense side all the time. So defense lawyers are listening to this. They're going to be like, I can't stand lunch hour legal marketing now. But they're going to paper the account because they're just billing by the hour. It's not tied to their ability to mitigate the risk, right? The defense lawyer is not like, they're not getting paid by perceived value of the risk of the loss, which the plaintiff lawyer is. They're just saying, let's just get in the car and we'll drive this thing as long as we possibly can and send you a bill. And congratulations if we win. And oh, sorry, here's the bill if we lose. Anyway, my ranty point is that there's a lesson to be learned about aligning incentives with clients from a pricing standpoint, and even from a business model standpoint. Like, how do you? And this goes back to the value-based conversation, which that's the thing that I really love talking about. Is like connecting your pricing and your marketing and your positioning to the value of the expertise that you deliver to a client. That resonates a lot more than I fight really hard, I've been practicing forever, and so therefore I'm $500 an hour.
Money makes a world go round. Money makes a world go round. Yeah, money make a world go round. Yeah, money make a world go